In Chapter 15, we are discussing trace minerals. So these are minerals that we need in much lesser amounts in the diet. I won't read the learning objectives to you, but as always, you may want to take a look at them. All right, pop quiz. The most common nutritional deficiency worldwide is iron. This is a trace mineral or micronutrient, a type of micronutrient that is often underconsumed around the globe. One of the most important reasons that our bodies need iron is because it is responsible for oxygen transport. In fact, the red color in our blood comes from the iron-containing protein hemoglobin. Iron deficiency anemia remains the most common nutritional deficiency not only in the U.S., but also worldwide. All right, so we just said it. What is that oxygen-carrying protein in the blood? It's hemoglobin. And again, that will bind and also transport oxygen. So almost 2/3 of all iron in the body is found in hemoglobin. It's also found in myoglobin in muscle cells. Iron is also an enzyme cofactor in metabolism, so it's involved in metabolic processes, and it's involved in immune function through the white blood cells. And this table just lists out the different iron proteins and where you'll find them. And here we just kind of see a blow up of hemoglobin, so you can see what that looks like. All right, which of the following is the most bioavailable form of iron? That's heme iron. And that is going to be found only in animal flesh. So you'll only get heme iron in animal foods, whereas non-heme iron can be found in veggies, grains, and also supplements. Iron cookware can also contribute to your iron intake. Acidic foods will increase the amount that is sort of leached from the pan or the cookware and transferred into foods. So cooking your foods in iron pots or pans can actually help increase your iron intake. Here we see our usual table showing a variety of foods and the amount of iron they provide. You can see here liverwurst and clams are especially high, as well as life cereals. So those fortified foods can make a big difference too. There are a lot of factors that influence how well our body absorbs iron. The first one is need. When the body's supplies of iron are adequate, it absorbs a much lower percentage of iron than when stores are low and the need for more iron is high. That will in turn increase the body's ability to absorb iron. Diet. So again, remember, heme sources of iron, which are going to come from animal sources, are much more readily absorbed than non-heme sources, and that's because of a lot of competing factors, including phytic and oxalic acid, fiber and polyphenols, zinc, magnesium, and calcium. So all of these factors, if they are present in the foods or consumed at the same time as the non-heme sources of iron, absorption is going to be lower. Iron absorption is also enhanced by the meat protein factor, and so this is why when you are consuming non-heme sources, you'll actually be able to absorb more of those if you pair them with they used to talk about MPF as the meat, poultry, fish factor as well. So it's that idea that if you are eating those foods with an animal-based source of iron, which would be a heme source of iron, then it would be easier to absorb. So, for instance, if you have a chili or a stew that has beans, which would provide a non-heme source, along with, say, some ground beef, or turkey, for instance, you would absorb more of the non-heme iron. Vitamin C also increases absorption of that non-heme iron, so it's a good thing to remember to consume vitamin C containing foods along with your iron sources, and adequate levels of gastric acid will also enhance iron absorption. Sorry, the slide jumped there. This is just another slide that kind of demonstrates that heme versus non-heme iron, in a more visual way. Next, we'll talk about iron absorption and transport. So you can see here the diagram kind of walks you through how The iron in food can be stored in the mucosal ferritin, so that's a storage protein. When the body needs iron, that will be released into transferrin, and I like to remember transferrin transport. That'll hand off iron to another transferrin that will, it'll travel through the blood to get where it needs to go. Now, if the body doesn't need iron, the iron can just be excreted in intestinal cells. This diagram from our book goes into great detail, and I think it's very interesting if you are into the biochemistry in terms of understanding iron absorption and distribution. But for the purposes of this class, you won't need to recall any of this information at this level. So kind of on a broader base, just remember that ferritin will bind and store iron to prevent it from entering the bloodstream. So it'll be stored in the liver, sometimes the bone marrow, and the spleen as well. And then about 90% of iron will be recycled and used where and when it's needed, and usually only up to about 10% will be excreted. In terms of recommendations, you won't be asked specifics, but do make note that women from the ages of about 19 to 50 years old require quite a bit more than men or women older than this age. And this has to do with loss of iron in the blood when women are menstruating. So during the period when they menstruate, so again, roughly from about 19 to 50 years old is when they recommend this, that those needs are significantly increased. Vegetarians also have increased needs. Just again, remember, because non-heme iron is absorbed at such a lower percentage, so therefore consuming more throughout the day will ensure that adequate amounts are available to be absorbed by the body. You won't need to recall the upper level. Iron deficiency anemia is the most well-known and most commonly observed type of iron deficiency syndrome. Red blood cells become microcytic, so they're small, and also hypochromic, which is low in color, right? Hypochromic, so they become very pale. You'll see a reduction in hemoglobin synthesis, energy metabolism, immune function, and also cognitive development if this is occurring in children. And people just become very tired and weak and fatigued. This shows the different stages of iron deficiency. You won't be expected to know the different stages, for instance, on the exam, but do recognize that there are different stages. You don't have to be able to distinguish them, but just know that the deficiency does occur in stages. In terms of iron overload and toxicity, the upper level is set at 45 milligrams per day. Again, you don't need to remember that number. But anything above that can lead to nausea, vomiting, an irritated stomach, diarrhea, and often, again, this is a theme with minerals, right? An impaired absorption of other minerals. So if you're consuming too much of this one, it might block the body's ability to absorb others. Accidental iron overdoses are the leading cause of poisoning in children under 6 years of age. Typically, they are consuming a parent's supplements, iron supplement, or a supplement of some kind of a multivitamin that also contains iron as one of the minerals. So this is why it's so important for adults to be aware of, keeping their supplements safe, because we don't think of supplements sometimes in the same way we do, a medication, but it can be just as dangerous. In adults, iron overload is likely only due to a genetic condition, which is called hemochromatosis. So without that condition, typically adults do not end up reaching toxic levels of iron. All right, we'll move on now to talk about zinc. Its primary action, you can think of it as zinc fingers, but it's part of DNA and RNA synthesis. So you can see these zinc fingers here. Essentially, these end up being a force that can stabilize or even bind protein, typically protein structures, in place. So that's part of that function. But again, think about DNA and RNA synthesis. Other functions, it's an enzyme cofactor, which assists in the production of hemoglobin. It is related to growth, development of sexual organs as well as bones. It helps function of vitamins A and D. It's involved in immune function, insulin regulation. It's an antioxidant, and also has hormone activity. So lots of roles it plays in the body. Meat and seafood are typically thought of as the best sources or highest sources of zinc, but you can also find plant sources, including nuts, beans, wheat germ, and whole grains. Unleavened whole grain bread is high in something called phytic acid, and that decreases zinc's bioavailability. So when it's leavened bread, the action of the yeast fermenting, that will reduce the effect of phytic acid and make zinc more bioavailable. Here, as always, we've got our diagram. You can see the clear winner is oysters, providing about 704% of the daily value of zinc. In terms of absorption, this is another mineral where the absorption rate depends on intake and need. So the more that zinc is needed in the body, the better the absorption rate will be. Animal protein will enhance absorption, so kind of similar to the way iron absorption works. But there are a lot of factors that limit absorption. You've heard a lot of these terms already. Phytates, fiber, tannins, I think that one we haven't talked about yet, oxalates. Also, high intakes of non-heme iron will limit zinc absorption, so that's something to pay attention to in terms of when you might consume those foods. And calcium, like iron, will inhibit or decrease the absorption of zinc as well. Also, zinc competes with copper and iron for absorption. So that's something else to watch. Again, remember, too much or too high of an intake of copper or iron will limit absorption of zinc. A zinc deficiency can lead to delayed growth and sexual maturation. It can lead to immune dysfunction, poor wound healing, as well as dermatitis. Less significantly, but still important, hair loss and impaired taste, as well as loss of appetite and diarrhea. And then very significantly, really should have another hard return here before this last bullet, but a zinc deficiency can cause birth defects and infant mortality. Here we see an image of a preterm infant. So the baby was born early and born with zinc deficiency. And just to clarify, of course, when we're talking about birth defects or impacts on the infant, it's due to the mother's diet during pregnancy being significantly low in zinc. In terms of excess zinc intake, there is an upper limit set. Again, you don't need to remember it, but you can see loss of appetite, nausea and vomiting, as well as diarrhea, impaired immune function. So some similar concerns that we see when zinc levels are deficient. You'll also see a reduction in copper absorption and a reduction in the copper-containing enzyme activity. Mentioned before that zinc has a role in the immune system. Now, it does not boost an already healthy immune system, but when there is a mild zinc deficiency, a supplement can help the immune system. It can increase wound healing, immunity as a whole. It can increase appetite, and it can boost growth and learning in children, and the immune response specifically in the elderly. So again, remember the point here is that if someone's already getting adequate amounts of zinc, consuming more is not expected to enhance any of these types of immune function. But if there is a deficiency, increasing intake is likely to lead to these benefits. We'll stop here and pick up with copper in the next lecture.